All right. It has come to my attention that nobody understands how to make a healthy roster throughout time. So, NA is the worst example, and I will therefore use NA. So, here's the deal. Every sort of team, you can specify like a franchise player, right? Or ideally you have a core set of players and a core way that you play the game. This allows you to sub people in. So Evil Geniuses last year was a great example. And this year is pretty similar. So you've got Jojo Pyun. He's kind of we actually don't need to talk about Jojo Pyun. You had Danny. You had Vulcan. So Danny was your main late game asset who wins team fights, and therefore you had to play team fights around Danny. You had to play the game in a way that enabled Danny to get to team fights because he wasn't a lane winner. Inspired, being a smart pathing jungler, was part of this core. So your core was Danny Inspired. That was how you played the game. Any mid could have played here. We had Jojo, who was young and good at the game. Okay, sure. We have Impact top, again. Kind of any top laner can do it, right? Like Someday can do it. But the beauty of Impact is he's not going to go for any crazy plays if he doesn't need to. And Impact is just the best top that's ever played in NA. But that's a different story. So we can identify a core. Our core is Inspired Danny with maybe something like Impact. But Impact is old. He's on his way out, right? And so here's where our curves come in. We've got a young character like Jojo. Okay, so here's our curve. And you could say, okay, Impact, he's old. Inspired, he's not that old. He's got lots of longevity left. Now, Impact, if he plays his cards right, could have tons of longevity. But you have to understand that he could lose his ability to play. He could be, he could fall out a lot quicker. So Jojo is our developing person. He's not so what you tend to get is your game sense and your knowledge develops as you play more. So Impact is insanely knowledgeable, insane game sense. A person like this is typically very flexible, can play a lot of styles. A younger player who is successful typically can't play as many styles because they've only played in a few metas, et cetera, right? If lane swapping becomes the meta, then of course old people like Impact, players who have been around forever, like even Solo might be good. Players like where is I mean Wild Turtle could probably be really good at that. But I was thinking of Double Lift. He's somewhere, 100 Thieves. Here he is. Anyways, that kind of vibe, right? So you have to have your old people, and they also are usually strong voices. They're usually very useful in comms. So there's value in having these old people. But for the longevity of the team, you need to train the young people because the old people are the first ones typically to leave. This works in sports. This works in everything. You'll see if you watch CSGO, that is often exactly the case. You'll have CSGO teams are usually by country because typically they all speak one language, so it'll be like a French team or whatever. And you have a core of two really good players. So Navi has Simple and Zipnix or something. I hope I'm right. It's been a while since I looked at the players. But let's say you do have Simple and Zipnix. Then wait, it's not Zipnix. It's not Ziwu on the team, right? Sorry, I know this is a tangent. I mean, they're all famous, but yeah, okay. Electronic is the one. Electronic and Simple are they're sort of like core, right? And Perfecto's good, Bit's good. You could probably swap these people out. They did at one point have Boomich instead of Electronic, but stuff like Flamey. They were able to play with Guardian and Flamey, and it wasn't perfect. Guardian and Flamey went to like random teams after, but they've shown that you can just keep your Fragger, and typically you keep your IGL, and you just rotate other players through, and that's how you every single team in Counter-Strike does this. All the successful ones. Anyways, that's the point. Is you should do something similar in League. Ryoma didn't really play. FBI. The problem with FBI was that Danny was here. He was young, but he was also just incredibly talented, and he was part of the core playstyle. FBI is not part of the core playstyle. This man, what does he do? He wins lanes. Vulcan doesn't win lanes. So what? You have a win lanes AD with a sort of mid-late support. Now you're just mediocre at everything. And it tends to be that you don't want to be mediocre at anything. Or you want to either be really good or really bad at something. You want to put all your talent points in League of Legends into one skill. So Danny's team fighting, excellent. Inspired's early pathing, excellent. And he can carry if he, has a jungler that farms, but this dude is the PvE god. He doesn't need to play heavy skirmishing or whatever. Anyways, so FBI, we've subbed in for somebody who's kind of inspired level of he's kind of older, but not as good. But then we have Vulcan, who's probably somewhere up there too. And you can see why this team isn't quite as good, because we don't have a core. FBI is not really in our core play style. This kind of all cancels out. And so our core is, I guess, Inspired in JoJo, right? Unless someday comes back and it becomes an aggressive splitter or whatever, and then this is your core. And maybe JoJo and Someday are both really good splitters, and you have a 1-3-1 type thing. You can make some sort of argument for that. It just didn't show up. But this is how you do your roster building. You expect, okay, everyone's gonna level up by 1 this year. Now what do? I've got a ton of old people here. I need to get rid of one for the longevity of the team. I need to get rid of one because if it's a functioning team, then presumably I'm gonna get rid of one. They got rid of Vulcan, right? But it could be, you get rid of Someday. And I'm going to put somebody who's in that position, who's young, who can specialize at something similar. This is what Mad did, right? Where's Mad? So, is it going to show me the... Not really. This isn't what I wanted. I wanted to see the roster history over time. Could I get, I don't want MSI. Could I get Europe? EU. Yeah. And then give me EMEA 2020, 2021, 2022. Okay. So, Mad had... Was it 2019, actually? No. Yeah. Okay. Let's see. Summer playoffs. Mad has this roster, right? And they've identified that Karzi is their AD carry. They've identified that Humanoid is their mid. This is their main sort of thing, right? This is their core. Next year, what do? Yeah. Summer season? Summer playoffs? So on the following summer, Mad has Humanoid and Karzi, right? What did they do around that? Well, they said, okay, Shadow is good. Shadow is amazing, actually. But he's gone, okay, for multiple reasons. And what do we need? And then they said, okay, well, we need somebody who's an active voice, because Karzi is good, but he needs someone who's an active voice. Maybe Shadow was that active voice. Maybe that's his thing. He's a shot caller. So then they say, okay, we'll get Elioya. He's very active in the early game, etc., etc. They stick with Kaiser, and then Armut comes in instead of Odo. They're kind of different, but also not. Odo is like a slow sort of, like stable top laner, and Armut is like he's not as stable, but he's certainly like he's Monkey King man, right? Like he's gonna just play team fights well. So he's still kind of a back pocket wait till team fights kind of guy. And then we go to the next year. How does this team develop? Armut, Elioya, Niski. Okay, so this is kind of the crazy one where eventually you say, okay, Humanoid's old. I mean, they didn't. I assume they did not choose to drop Humanoid in some ways. And Karzi is old. Okay, so what are we going to do? Well, we're going to get some other younger or supportive players and then start to turn Armut and Elioya into our kind of core. And, that's how rosters evolve, right? You get your young people. You get your Jojo Pune, right? He starts low, but after a couple seasons, this dude is getting, and some seasons you're going to just gain more experience than others. Dude gets really good, really quick. And suddenly you're like, okay, I know my core was inspired and, someday, let's say, right? But let's start changing that, right? We've got this great player who can now handle having resources around him. Let's get rid of this guy. He doesn't need to take all the resources, and then we replace him with some supportive player. Like, I don't know, you could pick Arma could be good. You could pick, maybe not anymore. You could pick Solo even. Like, that's fine. Impact would have been great. But this is how you build your rosters. And ideally, it would be a younger supportive player, like, I don't know, Revenge, if you can argue that Revenge is young at this point, but, some kind of underdeveloped player that you can develop. Can I get rid of this? So that's sort of the vibe. But when we look at the way that teams are making their roster moves, it doesn't really fit with this diagram, and typically that usually makes me very suspicious. Like, oh, maybe I'm wrong about the curves because nobody is doing it. But when I look at the actual teams that are succeeding, which none of these teams are doing really, except maybe Cloud9, but Cloud9 does this super well, right? Like, if I had a diagram of how Cloud9 has evolved, it would be all about add in a young player. Blabber was so young when he came in, and now he's become the franchise, right? And Fudge was pretty new when he came in, and now he's become kind of a super stable top laner. MNS is now their new player, right? They got rid of, like, they've always gotten rid of legends at the peak, because what they've understood is, hey, we've got this curve. Maybe Fudge is like, getting there. Blabber is like way up here now. And then MNS is like kind of new. And Berserker is like kind of new, but also insane. So we got to put him like up here, right? And Sven is old as hell. And so what you'll see is the year before Sven starts to get bad, this guy's out. The year before Blabber starts to get bad, this guy's out. I think, unironically, like, these two are great, but they're, like, and Blabber's part of the core, but they're the next two to go, right? Unless, like, something goes wrong with the MNS experiment or whatever, like, they do this, but C9 has actually historically managed according to the curves and historically been on the top, like, every single time. So, yeah. And I think CLG had a good opportunity to have their young players and figure out how to work the curve. But then obviously NRG came in, and now, changes are going to happen. I forget who they dropped. Did they drop Luger, I think? Which kind of makes sense. He's kind of the oldest. you got to argue like Palafox is still developing, but he's close to half. You got to argue Contracts is pretty old at this point, and Dokla is actually pretty experienced. Um, and like a lot of this like this bar is hard to really grasp, right? Like what is this bar? It's not really just age, because there's other things. Like it's room for improvement almost. It's like how close to the end of their career are they? But it's not like there's performance as well, right? Like this is why we have like in like soccer, it's like you're a 95 with like potential of D, like it's not going higher. But then I might be like an 80, but I've got potential A, right? And like this guy might be like JoJo, and this guy might be like Impact, right? But there is a bit more to it, but the concept is that you want to have a nice like mana curve, but for your team. And there's lots of ways to make a deck, and there's lots of ways to make a team, right? Like I can make a control deck where I have fewer early game cards. I still need some, and then maybe my curve looks something like this, where it's kind of flat early, and then I stack a ton of actually 3 costs because they're just broken, and then like maybe not as many 4 costs, but then like way more 5, 6, and 7, or something like that. And actually sometimes like a combo deck would look like this, where it's just like, okay, typically this is objectively a bad curve, but because I scale up super early or whatever. So we want to have a similar thing. And an aggro curve would be something like this, right? So we want to have something kind of like this in our team. And so something like a Liquid tends to have a very high, close to their ceiling, possibly even at their ceiling for almost all the players. Liquid is like the greedy ramp deck. They're just like, boom, everyone's maxed out. Now, recently they've been trying something different, but it's not optimal. Like, it's not blended, right? At some point this year, maybe even, these players are going to hit their peaks. They're going to be like, done. They're going to just... And it might all happen at similar times because they're all similarly close to the end. They're all similarly experienced and old and successful and have nothing left to work for, etc., etc. So you got to bring in these young players and train them up. But right now they've done it in such a way that they don't have time, because they've already gotten the most washed player of all time. And by washed, I mean like compared to like winning worlds, this dude was never supposed to. He was never even that high. And like, this is the winning worlds level, and this is like where he was. And like he is like a -4 every year type thing. Like this dude is on his way out, So yeah, this is why Liquid is just horrible, because it's not blended at all. Like Liquid should have, I mean, maybe Summit's like kind of young and improving, but he's not. He's shown multiple times that he'll just like fall out. And again, this is a lot of like, we can argue all day over where the bar should be on these people, right? Like maybe everything I'm saying is just monkey stuff, but there is some sort of blendedness to the good rosters that succeed, and we see this everywhere. And again, like we talked about Liquid, we talked about EG and Cloud9. EG, Cloud9 good, Liquid never been good. TSM, I'm not even going to talk about TSM. I've refused to look at the players on TSM every year. We talked a bit about CLG, right? Like CLG, when they came in, and this is what happens. This is when people say they're building a development roster, they do this. Everyone all like fresh, and it's not gonna work. And the reason it's not gonna work is because we talked about this. You're up against like these guys, right? Like who have like big everyone. Of course you're gonna lose. Your power levels are too low and you don't scale. But if you do something like CLG did, and this is why CLG succeeded when others didn't. Dokla was already experienced and good. Contracts was already experienced and probably shouldn't even be in the league anymore. Palafox had some experience, but was still very young and good and ready to develop. And this guy's like an A in terms of development, right? Like he's on his way. Luger knew what he was doing. Poom was young but knew what he was doing. Like these players all had some experience. And so suddenly, it's not great. Like Palafox, Poom, and Dokla, like when these guys all hit their ends, I'm actually pretty sure Dokla's way older than that. But when these guys hit their ends, you're going to have issues. They're all going to, you're going to have to figure out how to get rid of some of these guys a little early. And it's going to suck because you're going to have to play against them. But they're on their way to a properly blended roster. You get rid of contracts, you get a young guy. You get Will or something. I'm going to say Will every time. But you get a guy like Will here. Now suddenly, you've only got one bar. And then, Luger gets old, and then you get rid of him, and then you replace him with like another, like Meech or something, right? Or whoever's good at the time. Maybe Good Boy is your guy, and then you're gonna have a good blended roster, and you can just you always know who's next to leave. You always know because they're not leaving because suddenly something went bad. Because you're not changing 12 players. You're not changing all 5 players every year like some teams. You're changing a few players, like one, but your core stays the same because these players know how to work together and they know how to win games. And this is just how you need to build your rosters. But alas, I'm pretty worried that NRG is not going to do that. But we'll see. And anyways, so these are all the successful teams. These are all the teams that everyone cares about. Let's talk about shit teams. Let's talk about Dig. Okay, Dig went old. Dig went old. Dig went old. Dig went young. And this is like how old that guy is. I'm not convinced Armut's improving, but whatever. This guy's also that old. And then Dig went, who is this guy? So we can see the same issue as Liquid. There's no room for curve. You're going to drop everyone at the same time. Or like keep someone for a little too long. Or maybe do something like this. But your core is gone. These guys did not have time to become a core. They also don't like again, if you have someone like who's an S, like a JoJo or something at development, maybe you're going to be able to get him into your core a little quicker. But really, JoJo still took like a year and a half, if not 2. So, yeah. Anyways, this whole Dig roster is just a rental roster. You're going to need to buy another roster. Like, you're going to need to buy another half level players to fix this. You're going to need to buy, you're going to need to replace Santorin with someone who's slightly less old because you still need to have somebody old on the team. And when I eventually, here, let's restart this. Because this is what happens when it goes wrong. You have Spawn and Tomo, who are both, first of all, questionable, not necessarily going to win, or not necessarily going to stay. Spawn's maybe a little more experienced. And they're unproven, et cetera, et cetera. And then you have Santorin, maybe on his way out, right? Let's say. And you have Jensen, who, again, maybe on his way out soon. Maybe you keep him for one more year. But you need to have... maybe this is the only way that you can save this, is you have Santorin go away. And then you keep Jensen, and you keep Armut, and you say, okay, these guys, we'll keep them around. They're kind of maybe a little past their prime, but they're there to serve the job of blending the roster. And then you buy someone at half. You buy someone at this level. So, Tomo, sorry, it's Biofrost who played. That's a silly mistake. I remember now. Sorry, guys. But same concept, bro. Biofrost is just old. So you're not getting any development out of this guy. You're getting some development out of this guy. Very little out of this guy, but he's still fresh, so I'll give him a little space. None out of this guy. Pretty much none out of this guy. So, same thing. You're going to have to drop Biofrost. You're going to have to drop Santorin or whatever, let's say. And you're going to have to keep blending it. Because you can't can't have this, right? Spawn can't develop around exclusively rookies either, right? If I drop and I have Armut Jensen and I have Will, Spawn, and Trevor, this roster is not greatly blended, right? Like, really not great. Jensen's already kind of too old, or kind of too, like, past his prime. Armut's already kind of eh. And these players don't have a strong blended roster. It would be much easier if you could get rid of everyone and just buy something like CLG, or buy something like EG, or buy something like C9. But alas, you can't. And anyways, this team is slightly less of an example now, but because we have like enough old people, it's typically easier to save that. But if we did have something like this, I don't know. They're both old. Let's say we did have something like this. Then to get these people to come up, we would have to now rent basically a player. Like, we get rid of our old people. We get, a couple people. We get a couple people who are, fairly new. And then we have to get people who are up here still. Maybe we can keep Jensen. But we get rid of Armut Santorin. We have to get people who, like, we can get one rookie, but Jensen can't be the only old man on the team. We have to get people who are up here to help bring experience to our bot lane, to help bring experience to our new top laner, to help be played around and win us games and be part of our 2-man core, because a 1-man core doesn't work. And so our issue is that we're now buying a player like just at or past his prime, and we're wasting so much money doing that. Buying a player at their prime is such a waste. And you'll notice that like something like a C9 never buys a player at their prime. Something like a Mad Lions doesn't buy a player at their prime. Something like a T1 doesn't buy a player at their prime, right? Like, it's just simple enough that economically not worth it, because you buy a player at their prime and what happens? They're going to be gone in 2 years. So anyways, this has been roster curves. How many years has this video gone? Like 27. Okay. We'll hit 30. We'll talk about some other team. What's another shit team? Immortals, bro. I don't even know what to say. Kenvi is young. Revenge has developed into a decent laner. He's fine. A Blalov. So the thing is, Balulu has been around a while, but he's freaking good. he's maybe at his prime. If we call this prime, Balulu's at his prime. A Blalov probably could improve, but you could argue he already hit his prime. Anyways, Balulu is just better. Like this is where the curves kind of fall apart. How am I supposed to show that Balulu is better, but Blalov has no prime left, right? Same thing with like, how do I show that Jensen is still amazing? But whatever. Tactical, same thing. Dude's how is Tactical getting better? Like, you put him here, and Fleshy is kind of, let's say, younger. Maybe he's like kind of Revenge level of age, right? We have the same issue of like kind of everyone's around the same. You want to get rid of Tactical. You can keep Balulu for a year or two, but eventually he's at his prime. We'll see how long that lasts. And then, like Revenge is gone. So Tactical, Fleshy, like neither of these are really particularly impressive, particularly like keep around for a while, right? And so maybe I would argue that they're up here. They're like, they don't have as much. Yeah, maybe that's how this bar should work. They don't have as much room to improve. And so you're like, okay, these guys maybe are on their way out soon. So they're like, rental players. They're players who I don't have forever. And so I need to add more players. And so Immortals actually has a chance to not be shit anymore. They've lost Revenge, so. But they have Balulu, who's a leading voice, and now again they're forced to not just buy young promising players and see if they work, because the other thing is, and this is obviously, like, again, we've talked about, like, if you're losing multiple people in a year, everyone has to relearn. If you could keep a core, like, who is the core of Immortals? It's Spalulu and what, maybe Kenvi? I guess that's your core. So if you can keep this core and you can add pieces around it one at a time, keep Revenge for a year, get rid of Tactical, put in a young player who plays like Tactical, play Meech or something, play, yeah, you could play Daption maybe. There's not a lot of play like Wixie. I don't know. There's not a lot of, like, great, easy, obvious choices, but anyways, the concept is we can't buy all young players because we need to have they can't all come in at the same time and succeed, and yet we don't have structure for them to come in around anyways. So I guess that's sort of my deal with curves, and it's not great. It's definitely not optimized and perfected yet, but there's definitely something there about not having to change every single piece at the same time, you know?